Hey guys, welcome to another Snapdragons video. Today we're going to be breaking down Jude Cornett's top 8 Battle Hunt Singapore Living Legend list, kind of getting you guys ready for Skirmish and your upcoming ProQuest Yokohama events. We are joined today by Jude Cornett himself. If you want to say hi and kind of tell us how you're doing today.
Hey, I'm doing good today. Getting back ready to get back into the swing of school and excited to break down this deck.
Jude Cornett, the youngest member of Team Snapdragons, but also a bit of a prodigy. Some have compared him to Brody Spurlock. So I guess kind of where we want to start is why kind of play Dromai in this Living Legend metagame that we've got going on right now?
Yeah, so first of all, Dromai was the first deck I started playing Fab on, so when I heard there was an LL Battle Hardened, I knew I was having to play Dromai. In addition, though, I also think Dromai is pretty well positioned right now. After the most recent BNR, Chain got hit pretty hard, and I think that was one of Dromai's worst matchups because Dromai generally wants the game to go longer, and Chain only gets better as the game goes on. So I think Chain being less represented makes Dromai much, much stronger in this format.
Yeah. And kind of why would you really play Dromai of the other like board control heroes like Prism or Enigma, for example, or Gravy Bones?
Yeah, so I think for the most part, while Dromai is a little bit more targetable, considering that you can run poppers into her, and they're, in my opinion, more powerful than against a deck and especially OG Prism with Spectral Auras. I think her game plan is much more consistent because her deck is all reds and also more and most importantly is also a lot of cards that block 3, which means that into the aggressive decks, you're often able to flex to this very powerful game plan of set up 3 to 4 dragons, force your opponent into a choice of whether they want to clear your dragons and give you 5-card hands, or whether they want to attack face and let you go block 3 to 4 cards and then just play 1 card and come in for 10 to 15 damage. And so I think you have a lot more game into the powerful aggro decks in LL compared to other illusionists.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go off topic a little bit here, but is there also any new cards that have kind of come out this year that have really changed the deck much from its classic constructed version? Is there anything super powerful that's been printed recently?
Yeah, 100%. So one starting card, which isn't as recent but is very powerful, is Calming Gesture. So previously, when Dromai was legal in CC, you would run Seeker's Mitts just as a way to make an Ash on your opponent's first turn. Calming Gesture does all that. The only thing it doesn't give you is the opt, but it gives you a life, which is arguably similar to Seeker's Mitts, but in my opinion is a lot better, because if your opponent isn't able to leak through damage on that first turn, you get to keep the life. It also works as your Arcane Barrier, so into decks like Kano, you don't have to run an additional slot in your deck to be able to block their Arcane damage. And it also is just like actually a reasonable play on other turns of the game other than turn 0. Like, for example, a play you'll often make is any turn that you play a tome and you're not able to utilize all your resources, you'll just pop Calming Gesture and say, oh, this got me a life, even if you're not able to use it for Ash on your opponent's first turn. But in addition, she also got Dragon Scalar Flight Path, which is incredibly powerful. You usually end up using it on an Invoke Hyloria or a Dominia. But you can really use it on any of your dragons. I had a game against a Starvo where I knew they had no poppers in their hand, and so I just threw it on Yenderai for 3 extra damage. But its floor is basically always 5 extra value, 1 block, and then swinging a Kyloria twice, and it often can be worth way more because, on a key turn, being able to threaten a second on hit. If you throw it on Dominia, it's often worth like 10 extra value, especially since sometimes if you thought them twice, you'll take their only way to clear Dominia out of their hand. Overall, Flight Path is just like an insane upgrade for the deck. Not having snaps is a little bit unfortunate because it means that you don't get to play Snatch in the deck anymore. But I think that the additional 1 block armor, as well as like all the other benefits, definitely make up for it.
Yeah.
Other than that, there are. Oh, you go.
No, 100%. I get what you mean. I think I was gonna go to the exact same kind of card as you. Yeah.
Other than that, there isn't a ton of other changes. The biggest ones are Loyalty Beyond the Grave and Oath of Loyalty. Loyalty Beyond the Grave is just a classic 0 for 4 go again. It's another copy of Ravenous Rebel in the deck. It can sometimes be a bit clunky because while most of your cards are Draconic Illusionist, some of them aren't. Specifically, Ravenous Rebel and CNC. I have had turns where I have an Oath of Loyalty and a CNC in my hand. It's a bit clunky, but I think the power of it more than makes up for it. And then with Oath of Loyalty, it can sometimes be a bit inconsistent in faster games, but in my opinion, having another card that you can block with from Arsenal, in addition to being able to basically getting another benefit for taking the game long, I think is really powerful. Where against any kind of mid-range deck like Lexi or Briar, you just get another benefit for taking the game longer than 5 or 6 turns. Because if you can take the game, 7 or 8 turns, you're usually going to be able, I would say, I think it's about 50% of games in an 8-turn game, you'll be able to draw an extra card. And all you need in Dromai usually is that one extra card to take over the game with a 1-card play that lets you swing 5 dragons for 10 or more damage.
So some big upgrades coming through in Hunted there. What are kind of like the common play patterns or lines that you kind of employ in this deck? What's your average turn looking like?
So I think there are kind of 2 categories of decks that you can put your opponent's decks into, which is going to be your aggro opponents. They're going to try and kill you before you can get out enough dragons, and your decks that have more poppers and maybe be more happy playing a longer game into you. So into most of your aggro decks, basically what you're going to be trying to do is in the first several turns, using your life total as a resource, trying to get out 2 to 3 high power dragons, or maybe a Rake the Embers and 1 or 2 other dragons, and then pivoting into a more defensive game plan where all you're trying to do is stay alive, because your 1-card hands are now the most powerful 1-card hands in the game. You can go play a Dromai, play a Ravenous Rebel, play an Oath of Loyalty, followed by swinging 3 or 4 or 5 dragons, which can often end up being 20 plus value turn cycles, turn after turn after turn, if your opponent doesn't have poppers in their deck. The second style of deck will be decks that have higher popper counts. That's usually Starvo, Oldham, potentially some builds of, I've seen some Lexi builds that run 6 to 9 poppers, as well as like Briar decks that have some more as well. And into those decks, you'll often have to play a little bit of a more measured game. You're not as often going to be able to get off those easy Dragon Scalar Flight Path turns, but generally, unless you're playing against a deck with more than 20 poppers, they won't have enough poppers in their deck to be able to fatigue you. And so, because your deck is 60 reds, and so for the most part, you're just going to be able to play out your hand turn after turn after turn, and you're going to be able to pressure their popper count to the point where they're not able to block you out anymore, and you're able to keep dragons.
Yeah. Is there what are the maybe 2 matchups that you sit down and you're like, oh, this is great. This is my free win. This is kind of like, I don't have to worry about this round. And what are kind of 2 matchups that you would say you sit down and you go, oh, this one's going to be a lot harder?
So I think for the most part, one of the reasons to play Dromai, she actually has a pretty flat matchup spread. I will say during the Battle Hardened, one of the matchups that I felt pretty happy sitting down against was Briar. While they do have some poppers and they do have some explosive turns, and Arcane can be annoying, for the most part, they're pretty bad at clearing dragons, and they don't necessarily always have the potential to threaten lethal on turn 3 to 4. And so if they're not clearing dragons, it usually only takes about 2 or 3 turns of them ignoring your dragons for you to put them into a lethal blocking pattern. I would say another pretty good matchup, I think, is Starvo with the Crown of Seeds ban. While they do have a lot of poppers in their deck, you have a lot of defense reactions to meet their dominate. And they don't have that many poppers. They don't have nearly enough poppers to try and fatigue you. And also, they, for the most part, Frostbites can be annoying. But with the extra block on Dragon Scalar Flight Path and just, the massive amount of 0-for-4s in their deck, you're often able to block out Winter's Wail pretty well and stop them from making the Frostbites actually be annoying. Not to mention, a lot of the time, they have to end up using the Wail to clear a dragon after sending a big attack at your face. One other matchup that I think is really good is the new matchup. They're just going to be, all they're going to be doing is trying to kill dragons and gain life. And your deck has so much damage, and especially since they usually only have about 6 poppers, 3 Red Drone of Brutality and 3 Command and Conquer, that as long as you don't let the game go to second cycle where they can keep drawing back into their drones, you're just going to overwhelm them with tons and tons of dragons, and they're not going to be able to keep their life total high enough before you just get to the point where you have 6 or 7 dragons on the board. As for harder matchups, I think Chain is one of the hardest matchups for this deck. They're able to keep the game going for a long time. And so if all they do is just block and kill dragons, they will eventually outvalue you with getting 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 card hands. I don't think the matchup's unwinnable by any means, and it's definitely easier now that they have less access to go again with stuff like Coal and Succumb to Temptation, especially with like Eloquence tokens. But I do think it's definitely still a pretty tough matchup, and it's pretty fortunate that Chain isn't a big player in the meta right now, in my opinion. Another matchup that I think is difficult, I think Needle Ira is probably the other hard matchup for the deck. It's definitely winnable, but I think it probably requires having an early powerful Flight Path turn combined with either a Kyloria or a Dominia. They have a decent amount of poppers, and they also are pretty good at clearing dragons. I think you are reasonably good at breaking the needles, but I think if your opponent is on the naive list where they're running 15 Retrieve in their deck, breaking their needles isn't going to necessarily result in you winning the game because you're giving them too much time to just keep drawing into retrieve cards turn after turn after turn.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Kind of talking about recurring those needles back to clear dragons over time and kind of outvalue the fact that you're blocking, which actually just ends up providing more value in the long game and giving them too much time. Is there any kind of quirks or differences that you would say in this 80 cards that you would say is maybe different from what other people are doing with Dromai and LL?
So I think I'm a little bit more defensive than a lot of people that play Dromai. I really like the fact that because your deck is so many reds, it feels like you're very rarely going to run out of threats if the game is forced to go long. And so I'm very happy to just play a slower game, let me draw into my tomes to like have my power turns, and eventually know that because I have so many dragons in my deck, because I have so many threats in my deck, it's gonna be really difficult for my opponent to win in a long game because they're eventually gonna start drawing into more bricky hands. And I'm just going to continue to have a gas turn after turn. Other than that, I don't think there's a ton of weird stuff in the list. I think my sideboard is reasonably interesting. I could maybe talk about how I got to some of these numbers. I was playing with 3 Passing Mirage for the longest time, but I think that you don't actually need 3 against most of the decks in this format. Previously, Oldhim was more of a player, and you really needed 3 Passing Mirage and 2 Remembrance if you want to make the Oldhim matchup consistent, because you need to be able to recur your threats over and over again. But I actually think that because there's no Crown of Seeds, Oldhim falls off quite a bit, which means that other than Starvo trying to fatigue you or New trying to fatigue you through banishing cards from your deck, I think it's very difficult for most decks in the format to fatigue you, which, while I wouldn't say is Dromai's weakness, definitely put a lot of pressure on your sideboard because you definitely needed a lot of space that you could be using on other matchups to combat fatigue.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How was your actual tournament run at Singapore? What was your actual lead up to top 8 like?
Yeah, the event was a ton of fun. I think it wasn't a super large battle hardened. A lot of people showed up not expecting to play LL, but all the people that were there, all my opponents were great. I played against Brody Spurlock round 1. He was playing Gravy Bones. The funny thing was I walked into the venue the morning of, and he walks up to me and says, "Hey, you want to run a game real quick?" And we play a practice game. We both go back, finish submitting our decks for the battle harden, and then we get paired round 1. And his gravy list was actually really interesting. He was drawing, 7 or 8 cards a turn between cash in, belittle, stuff like that. But I ended up fatiguing him. It wasn't a particularly close game. Other than that, it was a lot of, standard meta stuff. I got 50'd by a Zen. That was my one loss in Swiss. But I beat, I think it was 2 Briars, 1 Zen, Birdie on Gravy, a Starvo, and then it was Alexi. And then in top 8, I played against Naib on Ira. It wasn't a super close game. I really needed to draw an early Tome or Kyloria turn, and the only turn I drew a Kyloria, my hand just did not go, so I needed to block with it. And then he just kind of outvalued me over the course of 7 or 8 turns. He played very well. Obviously, he won the whole event. The event was a ton of fun. Everyone there that did end up playing the Battle Hardened was just enjoying themselves, playing, reminiscing with old decks. There were some people there that just had not played these old decks and were getting to experience it for the first time, which I thought was really cool as well. As someone who joined the game during Outsiders, I didn't actually get to play with Starvo or Chain or Prism when they were in CC. But it's kind of cool, as someone who's played for 2.5 years at this point, now being the person who's played with these old decks that other people haven't played with, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah. How was Singapore weekend outside of that? How was kind of traveling and jamming with the team, and kind of how was the actual experience of traveling for the Pro Tour like?
Yeah, it was super fun. I had never been to Asia before this event. It was a pretty long trip. It was around 20 hours of travel, although definitely wasn't as long as some other people who were on the East Coast from the U.S. Um, Other than that, I felt like the jet lag didn't affect me as badly as it did some people. We got in about midnight at Wednesday. So we had like a day to get ready. We did 3 or 4 drafts on the Thursday. The keynote was pretty cool. The whole weekend was just a ton of fun. It was awesome to see Josh, Tommy the Calling. He's like been a beast, but he hasn't been to events in a bit. So it was cool to see him crushing it again. I really enjoyed like a lot of the food in Singapore. I'm definitely really excited to come back to Asia again for Yokohama next year.
Yeah, it's gonna be really exciting to kind of see you there. I caught you in Pro Tour London, and obviously that's a very different vibe to kind of Singapore and Japan. So it'll be exciting for you to try out somewhere new. Where can we kind of see you next in the immediate future, maybe the rest of the year?
Yeah, so I'm still working out whether I'm going to Montreal. Still need to figure the details on that one out. I'm definitely going to be at Battle Art in Tacoma, and then I'm definitely going to be at Worlds and Seattle for events for the rest of this year. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. That sounds very exciting. Is there anyone you'd kind of like to shout out, or kind of any testing partners that worked on the deck with you? Any stores local to you that you'd like to kind of shout out and give a bit of credit to?
Yeah. I'd like to shout out my roommate that I stayed with. He lent me some of the cards for this deck. I woke up at 6:30 in the morning and I was like, I'm gonna play in the Battle Hardened. I need to throw together a Dromai deck. And I was like missing like a Balance of Justice and a Stonewall Gauntlet. And he was like, I got you. And that was nice. I didn't actually end up boarding in Balance the whole weekend because or the whole event because I felt like every matchup I just like really wanted Crown Dominion, and most of the time I was going first anyway, which is where Crown Dominion shines. But Stonewall Gauntlet was like crazy. I blocked it against Brody's Conqueror, and it just like was worth a billion value. It was just like stopping the on hit. Other than that, my local game store, Fab Foundry, is awesome. I love them. They just recently ran the calling in KC. They did a great job. They also ran the calling in Portland last year. I hope LSS keeps having them run events. They're pretty cool.
Cool, that's awesome. Thanks for coming on the channel and kind of taking the time to break down the list. It's gonna be really exciting seeing you at events for the rest of the year. I know you're on coverage every couple of weekends at this rate. But yeah, it's been exciting having you. Thanks for coming on.